It started with a loaf of bread, a stubborn teenager, and a woman who had no idea she was picking a fight with the wrong person. But by the end of it, the whole neighborhood knew exactly who I was. I'm the police chief of this town, not that. I walk around announcing it or flaunting a badge to get respect. I'm the type who believes in letting actions speak louder than titles. But when a power-hungry HOA Karen crosses the line, calls the cops on you for a crime you didn't commit, and tries to publicly humiliate you in front of your own neighbors, well, sometimes the badge speaks for itself. This all began on a quiet Sunday afternoon when I stopped by the local grocery store after my shift. Still in my plainclothes cargo pants, navy pullover, an old ball cap, I looked more like a tired dad than a law enforcement officer. I had just a small cart of essentials: eggs, milk, cereal, some produce, and a fresh loaf of bread that had just come out of the bakery oven. That bread turned out to be the spark that lit the fuse. As I wheeled my cart toward the exit, I saw a boy maybe 15 or 16 standing by the doors with a bag of chips in one hand and his phone in the other. He was scrolling through it, not really paying attention to anyone. I didn't think much of it until I got to my truck and started loading the bags into the back. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, fast and entitled, and turned to find the same teenager now glaring at my grocery bags. "You took my bread," he said, arms folded. I blinked, thinking I misunderstood. "What, that loaf?" he said, pointing. "It was mine. I was going to get it after I went back in for the chips. You had no right." I let out a half laugh. "Kid, it was on the public rack. First come, first served. If you wanted it, you should have kept it with you." His scowl deepened, and without warning, he reached into my truck bed and tried to grab it. My instincts kicked in. I stepped between him and the truck. "Back off," I said firmly. "That's not how this works." He huffed, snapped a photo of me with his phone, and then stormed off across the lot yelling, "You're gonna regret this." I figured that would be the end of it. Annoying? Sure, but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. 10 minutes later, I was home unloading groceries when a loud knock echoed through my front door. I opened it to find 2 patrol officers standing there, young guys, fresh-faced, nervous. One of them was Officer Blaine, a recruit I had trained last year. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Chief," he said awkwardly, "we got a call. Something about stolen groceries." Behind them, standing in her full Suburban Warrior Glory, was Karen Worthington, head of our neighborhood HOA, and apparently mother of the bread boy. She was already madrant. He assaulted my son, took his food, and threatened him in the parking lot. "I want him arrested." The officers gave me a confused glance, clearly not sure how to proceed. "You called the police," I said, stepping outside onto the porch because your son tried to take something out of my truck that he left behind in a store. "He was getting chips," she barked. "That bread was his. You had no right to touch it." I crossed my arms. Did he buy it? No, but then it wasn't his. And he reached into my vehicle without permission. "That's attempted theft, ma'am." Her face went pale, then red, then somewhere in between. "You can't talk to me like that. I'm the HOA president, and I'm the chief of police," I said, pulling out my badge and flipping it open. "Now, do you still want to press charges? Because if we go that route, I'll be filing the first report for attempted theft and harassment." The silence was glorious. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Blaine cleared his throat. "Ma'am, it's probably best if we let this go." Karen looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. "You're all corrupt, protecting your own. This isn't over." She stormed off down the sidewalk, dragging her son by the wrist. I thanked the officers and invited them in for coffee, which they politely declined, and I thought that would be the end of it. But anyone who knows a real HOA Karen knows when she loses control, she doesn't back off. She doubles down. What? Next morning, there was a letter taped to my door, not mailed. Taped? It was from the HOA citing me for aggressive conduct unbecoming of a resident, public intimidation, and violations of neighborhood decency standards. I nearly laughed out loud. She was trying to punish me for defending my groceries. Not only that, she had summoned me to appear at the next HOA disciplinary meeting. I brought the letter into my home office, sat down at my desk, and for the first time in a long time, I decided to fight petty with paperwork. I printed out security camera stills from the grocery store. Lot hour trucks had dash cams after all. I pulled the body cam audio from Officer Blaine's response as it recorded every word she said, and I made a few calls to residents who had similar stories about Karen's vendetta-style HOA enforcement. By the end of the day, I had a folder an inch thick and a plan forming in my head. She wanted a war. She was about to get one but this time, it would be fought with facts, footage, and the law. If you've ever dealt with a Karen like this, someone who weaponizes petty rules and fake authority to control others, you'll want to follow every second of what happened next. Don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories, because this is only the beginning. The day of the HOA disciplinary meeting arrived quicker than expected. And though I was calm on the outside, I was fully prepared for the circus I knew Karen would try to orchestrate. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a well-maintained but lifeless building that usually hosted knitting circles and over-decorated seasonal events. Tonight, however, it was packed. Word had spread that the bread incident had escalated, and curious neighbors filled every folding chair and stood. Along the walls, many had received their own citations from Karen for things like wind chimes being too reflective or having grass half an inch taller than HOA regulations allowed. She could smell the tension in the air, mixed with stale coffee and overused carpet. Karen stood at the front of the room in her signature beige sweater, her clipboard clutched like a shield, her hair styled to perfection. Her son slouched to Rose's back, looking deeply uninterested. I walked in with a black binder under my arm, nodded at a few familiar faces, and took a seat directly across from the folding table where Karen and the other board members sat like a jury panel at a school talent show. Karen banged her gavel, which was completely unnecessary, but clearly made her feel powerful. "This meeting of the Evergreen Heights HOA is now in session," she said with dramatic authority. "We are here to address a grievance filed against resident Mr. Daniel Reeves." She paused to make sure everyone was watching, regarding a hostile confrontation, theft of private property, and behavior unbecoming of a community member. There were murmurs in the crowd. A few people rolled their eyes. One woman whispered loudly over a loaf of bread. Karen slammed the gavel again. "Order," she snapped. "We will have order." I waited until she finished reading her exaggerated accusations, then stood up slowly, opened my binder, and calmly said, "Thank you, Karen. Now, let's address the facts, shall we?" I passed copies of the grocery store parking lot camera footage to each board member, highlighting the moment her son clearly approached my truck and reached into it without permission. "What this shows," I continued, "is not theft on my part, but attempted theft on your son's. And under state law, that constitutes criminal behavior. I chose not to press charges out of professional courtesy." Karen opened her mouth to object, but I cut her off. "Furthermore, here is the body cam transcript from Officers Blaine and Kerrigan, who responded to your 911 call. Every word of your accusation is disproven by your own recorded statements." Karen's cheeks turned a bright shade of pink. I wasn't done. "And here," I said, placing a separate folder on the table, "are signed complaints from over 15 residents, some in this room who've received questionable, sometimes outright baseless HOA citations over the past year, ranging from mailbox colors to overuse of patio lights. Several of them have agreed to submit formal grievances to the County HOA Oversight Committee." The atmosphere shifted instantly. People began nodding. A man in the back stood up. "She'd fine me $50 because my American flag wasn't centered properly on my porch." A woman next to him chimed in. "She called animal control on my 10-year-old. Labrador said she looked aggressive for barking once." Karen's composure was slipping. "This is irrelevant," she shrieked. "This meeting is about you, not me." But it was too late. The floodgates were open. People had seen the proof and now felt emboldened to speak. For the next 30 minutes, one neighbor after another stood up to tell their story. Some were angry, some tearful, some even laughing at the absurdity they'd endured in silence for so long. What Karen had hoped would be a public shaming of me had turned into a full-blown HOA rebellion. One of the board members, an older gentleman named Harold, who usually nodded along with Karen out of habit, leaned into the microphone and said, "It seems we may need to revisit not only this incident, but the way we operate as a board in general." Karen's head snapped toward him like a hawk. "Excuse me? You've brought this community a lot of stress, Karen," he said firmly. "And if even half of these complaints are true, then maybe we've let this go on too long." Karen stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "You're all just mad because I enforce the rules. I uphold standards." "No," I said quietly, but clearly. "You abuse your position to control people. There's a difference." Murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Karen grabbed her bag and stormed out, dragging her son behind her again. This time, she didn't have the smug air of someone who believes she owned the neighborhood. She looked defeated, cornered by her own actions. After she left the meeting, continued, "The board made a unanimous decision to void the complaint against me and suspend all active citations pending review. They also agreed to call for a full audit of Karen's decisions during her tenure, which, according to one board member, had never been reviewed." That night, I returned home to find 2 handwritten thank you notes in my mailbox. One was from a single mom down the street whose garden had been flagged as cluttered, and the other from an elderly couple who'd been threatened with fines over their wind spinner decorations. The people were done being quiet. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. The tone of the entire neighborhood shifted. People who barely waved before now stopped to talk. Lawn chairs appeared on porches again. Kids rode bikes without their parents watching anxiously. I didn't go looking for praise, but people knew who I was, now not just the chief of police, but the neighbor who finally said no to Karen. And though I never wanted recognition, I knew I had used my voice for something that mattered. But I also knew Karen wasn't going to disappear quietly. She was prideful, vindictive, and still head of the HOA, at least for now. And as much as I wished the story had ended there, I had a strong feeling she wasn't done. If I'd learned one thing about Karens in power, it was this: when you take away their clipboard, they come back with a lawsuit or worse. And the next chapter would make everything that came before feel like a warm-up. Karen didn't show her face in the neighborhood for 3 days after the HOA meeting meltdown, which by her standards was practically exile. But anyone who had dealt with her long enough knew that silence wasn't surrender, it was plotting. And sure enough, by the 4th day, she was back. Marching across lawns in her khaki slacks and lavender blouse like nothing had ever happened. She wasn't making eye contact with anyone. She had that signature clipboard back in hand, and a tight little smile on her face that signaled something worse than angry yelling strategy, which I didn't hear from her directly again until I received a certified letter addressed to me at work. It came in a heavy envelope with 2 documents inside. A formal HOA, petition to review conduct unbecoming of a civil servant in the community, and a note signed by Karen herself, accusing me of bullying, abuse of power, and intimidation toward a minor. It was laughable, especially considering her son had tried to take something from my vehicle unprovoked, but her letter wasn't meant for justice. It was her way of escalating, trying to move the battlefield from the neighborhood to my professional life. I handed the letter off to our city attorney and the mayor during our weekly department heads meeting. Both of them read it silently, exchanged looks, and the mayor chuckled under his breath. "Dan," he said, "I think she just made our next community newsletter a lot more interesting." We all knew Karen. She'd filed dozens of complaints over the years, ranging from noise violations at 4 p.m. in the afternoon to conspiracy theories about people watering their lawns on the wrong days. But none of them had ever been backed up with real evidence, and none had ever risen above nuisance status until now. The difference this time was that I had already gone public with her nonsense. That HOA meeting had been the spark that lit a fire under the community. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now walked taller. One retired judge even approached me privately and offered to help investigate the legality of how Karen had been running the HOA. "She's using bylaws like weapons," he said. "Half the fine she's issued wouldn't hold up in a small claims court, let alone a real legal review." That's when I knew we had the momentum to make real change. We didn't just want her to back off, we wanted her removed. The trick was doing it the right way. I reached out to the same people who had spoken at the HOA meeting and helped organize a petition for a special election to recall Karen as HOA president. According to the bylaws, it required signatures from 51% of the homeowners. Within 6 days, we had 73%. Not only that, but several residents had begun pooling money for legal support to demand a financial audit of HOA expenditures during Karen's leadership. There had always been rumors that the community improvement fees she imposed weren't actually going where she claimed. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just facing backlash, she was under scrutiny. At the next emergency HOA board meeting, held under public demand, Karen walked in with a printed rebuttal, shaking with fury as she read her statement into the microphone. "This neighborhood is falling apart," she said. "You're letting one man destroy the order we worked so hard to build. You're throwing away structure and accountability just because you don't want to follow the rules." Someone in the back yelled, "You mean your rules?" The crowd laughed, but Karen didn't flinch. She kept reading, her voice trembling more from rage than nerves. She tried to frame her behavior as necessary leadership in chaotic times, and claimed she had been unfairly targeted by a coordinated misinformation campaign. The irony was stunning, considering how she had tried to get me disciplined at work over a grocery store misunderstanding. When the vote was finally called, it wasn't even close. Out of 87 homeowners, 64 voted to remove her from office. Another 9 abstained, and only 14 voted in her favor. Most of them people who had either never been fined or were part of her inner circle. Just like that, Karen's reign was over. But she didn't leave gracefully. She stormed out before the results were fully announced, knocking over a potted plant near the clubhouse door and threatening to sue every last one of you. I half expected a lawsuit the next day, but what came instead was far more dramatic. A local news station picked up the story after someone leaked the video of Karen screaming during the vote count. The segment was titled HOA Showdown in Evergreen. Height, and within hours, it had over 100,000 views on YouTube. Karen became a meme. Someone even edited her yelling into a remix over a techno beat and uploaded it as Karen's HOA Meltdown remix. I didn't share it myself, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't watch it more than once. Despite the chaos, something good was happening. The new interim HOA board, led by Harold and a few new volunteers, started clearing out outdated regulations. Fines were suspended until everything could be audited. A new code of conduct was proposed that required board members to act with transparency, fairness, and community input. It was the exact opposite of Karen's regime. I started getting thank you cards again. People dropped off pies, waved when I jogged past, even left small notes on my doorstep thanking me for standing up not as a police chief, but as a neighbor. One note read, "You didn't just stop her. You helped all of us breathe again." And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't about bread or rules or even Karen. It was about power, who gets to have it, who's brave enough to say no when that power becomes abuse. And in the middle of that realization, as the neighborhood began rebuilding from years of unnecessary tension, I got a knock on my door. This time it wasn't police or Karen, it was her son. He stood there with his hands in his hoodie pocket, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "Hey," he said, "I just wanted to say, sorry, I shouldn't have tried to grab your stuff. My mom, she gets in my head sometimes." I nodded, surprised but grateful. "Takes guts to say that, son," he shrugged. I think I just needed to see how bad things had gotten. Turned to leave, but added, "Thanks for standing up to her. Many people could." I stood on the porch long after he left, thinking about how the smallest things can change everything. A loaf of bread, a teenage mistake, a clipboard, and the will to push back. But I also knew Karen still had cards left to play, and if she couldn't use rules, she'd try revenge. Karen disappeared for nearly 2 weeks after her removal. Not a word, not a sighting, not even one of her usual anonymous complaint flyers on doorsteps. But just when the community began to settle into the idea that she might finally be gone, for good, the letter arrived. Not handwritten, not HOA branded. A heavy cream-colored envelope addressed to me in block letters. And inside, 2 things: a printed legal complaint and a letter from Karen's attorney accusing me of defamation. of character, harassment, and professional misconduct. It was a civil lawsuit filed at the county level, claiming I had orchestrated a public smear campaign against her and caused irreparable damage to her social standing and career prospects. Never mind that she had no actual job, and her only real career had been terrorizing the neighborhood with citation threats. She was suing me personally for $150,000. It was a desperate move. I knew it. But that didn't mean I could take it lightly, so I did what any police chief with a target on his back would do. I called my legal team. The city couldn't represent me in a civil matter, since the complaint was directed at me as an individual. But I had more than enough professional connections to pull together a solid defense. My attorney, a sharp woman named Kelsey Grant, looked over the documents and nearly laughed out loud. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," she said, "but she's banking on this being enough to intimidate you into a settlement or to make you look guilty in the court of public opinion." I wasn't worried about the law, but I was concerned about my community. Even though Karen had been ousted, she still had her handful of die-hard followers. And more importantly, she now had a legal case she could manipulate in her favor. The next few days were tense. Whispers started. People talked at mailboxes and playgrounds. "Did you hear Karen's suing Dan? She says he abused his power. Maybe he went too far." Some residents began distancing themselves. A few even emailed the interim HOA board asking for a formal pause on all restructuring until the lawsuit was resolved. Plan wasn't to win. It was to poison the well. To throw just enough doubt that people started questioning the very justice they'd asked for. So I did something I'd never done before. I went public. I held a neighborhood meeting not through the HOA, not through any board, just an open invitation sent door to door. It was held in my front yard on a Saturday morning, folding chairs lined up under the big oak tree, coolers filled with iced tea and lemonade, and a small speaker set up for sound. I stood up in front of 50 neighbors and told the truth. I explained the lawsuit, what it claimed, and why it was baseless. I showed them copies of the petition they had signed, the meeting transcripts, even read part of the complaint out loud. "This isn't about justice," I said. "It's about control. Karen didn't get her way, so now she's trying to sue me into silence." A hush fell over the group, and then, slowly, people began to nod. Someone clapped, then more. Long people were raising hands with questions, telling their own stories against stories they had kept quiet because they thought the drama was over. "She tried to fine my daughter for having a lemonade stand," one mother said. She told my husband to remove our wreath because it was too political. It was a football team logo, another man added. What I thought would be a 30-minute meeting turned into a 2-hour town hall. At the end, the same retired judge who had helped with the HOA recall stood up and said loudly, "I think it's time we file a community countersuit." The idea hit like a lightning bolt. Kelsey, my attorney, nodded in agreement. "If you have this many witnesses, and they're willing to testify to a pattern of abuse, we can turn this into a class action defense. Not only would it neutralize her lawsuit, it could actually bring her to justice." For the next week, my home turned into an unofficial legal coordination center. Neighbors dropped off letters, emails, pictures, and copies of fines. One even brought a USB drive filled with recordings from their home security system capturing Karen threatening to have their home flagged for disruption if they didn't cut down their rose bushes. It was more than enough. Kelsey filed our countersuit within 10 days. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was the entire neighborhood versus Karen Worthington. The charges: harassment, misuse of HOA authority, false reporting, and civil damages. For emotional distress and property devaluation due to years of unfounded citations. When the court date was announced, it made headlines. Local news ran the story under the title, "Neighborhood Uprising. HOA President Sued by Residents She Once Ruled." The comments section exploded. Videos of Karen's previous HOA meltdowns were shared again. Memes resurfaced. But beneath the internet humor was a powerful truth. People were done being silent. At the pre-trial hearing, Karen looked like a ghost of her former self. Her usual sharp posture had wilted. Her clipboard was gone. Her lawyer tried to argue that the countersuit was retaliatory and baseless, but the judge wasn't buying it, especially not after we submitted over 30 formal statements and a stack of recorded violations that clearly showed a pattern of harassment. The judge set a full trial date and advised Karen to consider a settlement. That day, as I walked out of the courthouse, something unexpected happened. Karen's son again approached me in the parking lot. He looked tired, weighed down, not with guilt this time, but with frustration. "She's not going to stop, you know," he said. "She can't lose." I nodded. Some people confuse power with identity. Take that away, and they unravel. He gave a small nod. "I just wish she knew when to stop." He walked off without saying more, and I watched him go, knowing full well the next step in this battle was going to be the hardest yet because we were going to trial, and Karen had nothing left to lose. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. It felt more like a movie set than real life, rows of chairs filled with neighbors, reporters scribbling in notepads, and even a few folks who admitted they came just to finally see Karen lose in public. The judge presiding was no nonsense and respected in the county, someone who wouldn't tolerate dramatic outbursts or wasted time. Karen arrived with her attorney, a stern-looking man in an overpriced suit. While I entered with Kelsey in a box full of evidence, organized in precise color-coded folders, from the moment opening statements began, it was clear we weren't dealing with a simple petty squabble. Karen's lawyer tried to paint her as a devoted community leader who had been unfairly villainized by a small group of homeowners led by a man with significant institutional power. He gestured toward me like I was the godfather of a suburban rebellion. Kelsey didn't even blink. Her response was razor sharp. "This isn't about power, it's about abuse of it. My client did what the HOA board and over 60 residents were too afraid to do for years. He stood up to a bully." We began our presentation with the bread incident, showing the grocery store footage of Karen's son reaching into my vehicle. We played the body cam audio of Karen's 911 call, where she falsely claimed I stole from a minor and threatened violence. The courtroom was silent as her voice echoed, shrill and dramatic, against the cold, hard truth of the recording. Then we rolled out the documentation fines that contradicted HOA bylaws. Citations given to single mothers and elderly couples over lawn ornaments, threatening letters with no official board approval, and finally the testimony, one by one. Neighbors took the stand. Some had been fined hundreds of dollars. Others had been humiliated in front of friends and family. A few broke down in tears recalling how Karen's obsessive enforcement had made them feel unsafe in their own homes. One man recalled being reported to child services because his son played too loudly in the backyard. After 6 p.m., another recounted how Karen had sent him anonymous letters, accusing him of bringing down neighborhood value because he had a truck parked in the driveway. With each story, the courtroom shifted further from sympathy to disbelief and finally, outrage. Karen sat stone-faced through most of it, though every so often she would whisper furiously to her lawyer or shake her head in theatrical disbelief. Then came her turn to testify. Her attorney advised against it, but she insisted. She took the stand, straightened her spine, and looked directly at the jury. "I was just doing what no one else had the courage to do," she said. "This neighborhood was slipping. I brought structure. I enforced the rules everyone else ignored." Kelsey stood and asked one question. "Did you ever receive board approval for any of the fines you issued?" Karen hesitated. "I had verbal support." "That's not what I asked. Did you ever receive written approval for these citations as required by your own HOA bylaws?" Karen faltered. "No," Kelsey smiled. "No further questions." It was the crack that shattered everything. Trial wrapped after 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found in favor of our countersuit unanimously. Karen was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $60,000 for misuse of authority, as well as $25,000 in damages to specific plaintiffs named in the class action. The judge also issued a formal restraining order preventing her from serving on any HOA board in the county for a minimum of 10 years. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Outside, reporters tried to corner Karen for comment, but she pushed past them, covering her face with her purse. She was done, and everyone knew it. In the weeks that followed, Evergreen Heights changed. Not in big, flashy ways, but in subtle ones. People started organizing their own block parties without fear of being shut down. Kids played in sprinklers without getting complaints. Flags of all kinds were proudly flown, and lawn ornaments popped up like confetti across yards that had once looked more like golf courses than homes. The interim HOA board voted to permanently ban any one person from holding the presidency for more than 1 year at a time, and implemented a new transparency protocol requiring every fine or citation to be reviewed and approved by 3 board members before being issued. I kept a low profile after the trial. I didn't need attention or praise. I was just glad people could breathe again. Still, every now and then, someone would stop me at the store or on the sidewalk and say, "Thanks for taking her down." I never corrected them, because it wasn't about taking her down. It was about standing up. One Saturday morning, a few weeks later, I was outside mowing the lawn when I saw a familiar figure walking down the sidewalk. It was Karen's son. He nodded at me. "Hey, Chief," he said, pausing. "She's moving." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah," said this place never appreciated order.
Yes.
"I think she finally figured out she can't run a neighborhood like a dictatorship." I gave a small smile. "What about you?" He shrugged. "Staying with my dad for a while." "It's calmer there," he hesitated, then added, "You did the right thing, sir, even if it messed everything up for her. It needed to happen." I nodded. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is what's right, especially when it's not popular. He nodded once more and walked on. That was the last time I saw anyone from the Worthington household. Their house went up for sale the next week. And within a month, a young couple with 2 toddlers moved in. They planted sunflowers in the front yard and hung wind chimes on the porch. No one stopped them. No one said a word. And that's how I knew the story had truly ended. Because Karen didn't just lose a lawsuit, she lost control. She lost the illusion that fear could substitute for respect. And in the process, she gave us something far more valuable than her absence. She gave us our community back. If you ever find yourself up against someone who uses fake authority to control others, remember this: truth has weight. Justice has patience. And sometimes, the only way to take down a tyrant is to stand your ground with nothing but a loaf of bread. And the courage to say no. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own neighborhood battle, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Sham Stories for more unbelievable real-life showdowns just like this one. Your support helps bring stories like these two life and reminds every Karen out there that the community always wins in the end.